So welcome back to the program. Let's Talk Vets. Jason Sherwin, you are a co-founder of an amazing company called deCervo. And you and I have spoken on several occasions about your work in general and recently your work with the U.S. military. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for welcoming me back to Let's Talk Vets. You know, it's always a pleasure to join you and your audience in the region here where deCervo's home base is on the New York, PA kind of border.
Well, it's a fascinating story. So it's been a while. I think the last time we talked was about a year ago. And I'd like to have you just briefly give us a 10,000-foot view of how and when the company started and how you realized that your thoughts on decision-making could be invaluable in beginning with baseball. And take us through that up to your work with law enforcement, please.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, this is building on our 2024, 2025 conversations. So if anyone does want to refer back to those on Spotify, it was actually turned out to be a momentous day in 2024. It was July 13th, the same day that the first assassination attempt on President Trump happened, and the February 25 interview both talked quite a bit about some background with deCervo. deCervo was founded by two doctors, two PhDs. I'm one of them, and Jordan Maraskin is my partner. He's the other one. Now, we're not medical doctors, both engineering doctors. And the idea with deCervo was to bring neuroscience to practical decision training. Believe it or not, there's a big gulf between the basics of how the brain works in neuroscience and how it's actually employed in day-to-day decisions, whether they're quick decisions like you're driving a car and something runs across the road and you got to stop, or more deliberate decisions about how you write a report after a bad shooting if you're in law enforcement. So our name really comes from this decision element in French, actually, or in any Latin language, Romance language. deCervo, it means of the brain, and it kind of plays on that wordplay of decision. We focus on helping people in high-pressure environments make faster and smarter calls when it counts. So I say calls because we started in sports, and then from there went into public safety. In the sports world, our first products were in baseball and softball hitting, specifically focusing on getting hitters to recognize pitches and different parts of the zone better. So that's our uHIT product, uHIT. It's an app on the App Store, uHIT Baseball or uHIT Softball.
So, Jason,
yes.
Let me ask you, for a young athlete or coach listening, is there one misconception about hitting that neuroscience helps correct, or maybe there's more than one?
There's the saying about the hardest thing to do in sports is to hit a round ball with a round bat. I think the biggest misconception actually about hitting is that it doesn't have to be that hard. We've seen this with, hundreds of hitters at this point who dedicate to the training that we provide through uHIT and through working with us and our team, is that if you know where the ball is going to be and when it's going to be there, it does not have to be the hardest thing to do in sports. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception, and it continues really even to this day. Many players and coaches believe that it's something that they just can't train and don't want to dedicate the time to train, and so they're generally their solution is, well, let's just go hit some more balls in the cage. The problem with that is that you're usually practicing the thing that's already gotten you into trouble numerous times in the past. Whereas, we've identified in many hitters the types of problems that are getting them into trouble and making it the hardest thing to do in sports for them. We still do work in sports. We have moved away to focus more on law enforcement and more on our Army work because there is just generally this kind of overriding preconception in baseball and softball hitting that it's not changeable.
And it's fascinating because if you really think about it, so we're out there, as a team getting ready for our big game tomorrow. And we have our pitcher or several of our pitchers practicing with us, but that's them pitching to us. And what we're going to see tomorrow is completely different because all pitchers are different, right? And they all throw differently. So the practicing helps, I think, your uHIT program and the programs that you develop for the umpires and what have you to make better calls faster. I think that's very valuable. But on into your work with law enforcement and the military, that's really has a potential of some really, really big impact for a community and for the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, yeah, we might have to hire you on our baseball and softball hitting sales line, Doug, with that kind of pitch.
We're all selling something, my friend.
Right, right. Well, I'd say, the transition to law enforcement on the ground began with law enforcement on the ice. That's kind of what I refer to our work that we did over the last 8 seasons with the NHL and with some of the other affiliated, minor leagues like the AHL and the ECHL, and similarly named to uHIT, uHIT. We made uCALL, uCALL, and uCALL was really about helping the referees and linesmen, and also we had a version for umpires, going back to baseball. But really, the uCALL for hockey officials helps sharpen judgment through realistic video scenarios that had to be decided on in the moment against what the law was, in terms of what the rule book was for the NHL standard of call making. And it's a very similar technical process to what we do in law enforcement with our eTRAIN product, eTRAIN. And eTRAIN supports law enforcement, usually on the ground or foot chases or vehicle stops or pedestrian stops. But it supports law enforcement officers in their split-second decision-making with split-second decision drills that they do off of body-worn camera in scenarios that are made around body-worn camera footage. But the core idea for all these, for uHIT, for uCALL, for eTRAIN, it's very simple. It's use gamified video-based training or visual-based training with objective feedback, but we use a layer of AI to build the brain's decision-making skills under stress, the brains of the hitter, the referee, or the law enforcement officer. And that's exactly the kind of cognitive edge our veterans and other service members need. So that's really been, how we've made that transition into work that we're doing with the Army. I mean, we've done research work as a company for the Army since 2017 with the Army Research Office. I've personally worked as a contractor, splitting time between Columbia University and the Army Research Lab since 2011. Before that, and all of that focus has been on how to bring this split-second decision-making enhancement and cognitive edge to our veterans and our service members.
When most people think about law enforcement, what they see on television or in a movie, the importance of what you're talking about starts when the cruiser rolls up. Mm-hmm. We have to look, maybe there's several people. Who's the problem and what's the problem and how do I approach it? And right from the get-go, to keep it in the context of being constitutional, so that if we're going to prosecute that the stop was found to be legal and what we have done was found to be legal and above board and doesn't result in stuff that seems to go on these days depending on the situation. So once I've determined that, when do I switch over from talking to physical or deadly force,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We're recording this on July 10th. Yesterday has been an interaction that was a First Amendment issue in Texas. The police officer was telling someone who was counter-demonstrating. They were religious leaders. The officer is on camera saying that the preacher cannot speak and say certain things. One of the biggest media organizations, Blue Lives Matter, and said, this is a clear violation of First Amendment rights. And there's various, mudslinging going on right now about, this person should be fired. But we look at it as a training opportunity. I'm sure that this officer doesn't know or doesn't realize how this may be a violation of First Amendment protected speech, right? And likely what's going on is, if this is a counter protest, she is potentially conflicted about the fact that there is another permitted protest going on or a demonstration going on that she is protecting, and they're the counter protesters, and so she's trying to keep everyone safe by keeping the counter protesters at bay. But she hasn't realized that in doing so, she's violating the First Amendment.
Something I've thought a lot about these days. And when does free speech become hate speech? When does it become provocational?
Absolutely. There are many forms of speech that the Supreme Court has recognized over the years. I don't know where the chips are going to fall on that particular incident, but it's a great example of, especially since there is video of it, and I'm sure there will be body cam footage of it too, that would allow our eTRAIN platform to be used to take that body-worn camera footage or even the citizens' camera footage and make a scenario about it. Say, all right, at this point, can you tell this person they can't say this? At this point, are you violating their First Amendment? If you search them, right, are you violating their Fourth Amendment? These are the kind of examples of the way that eTRAIN gets into the specifics of what do you know at this point? What can you do at this point? What can you justifiably do at this point? It's a recurring issue police agencies are running into. We see it in the news, but they'd like to be able to address this. Generally, we find that recruit and field training officers, they're very well versed on First Amendment and Fourth Amendment type things because they just learned about it, right? And they're very good at kind of gating when they decide to take action in relation to those protected rights. The older, more experienced lieutenants, captains, and even go on up to like the command staff level, deputy chiefs, sheriffs, under sheriffs. Some cases have not been on the road for probably 20, 25 years. Chiefs that haven't been on the road for that amount of time either. And we've seen that there are some cases where we'll put them through a scenario like this class that I've been giving around the country, neuroscience of law enforcement decisions. And they do this hands-on. They do this scenario like, you got some protester yelling in their face, or you got somebody that you need to search, but, you can't violate their Fourth Amendment. It's totally anonymous, so we don't know who's deciding what, but we know percentage-wise in the room. But there are large percentages of very senior police leaders that do not know at the particular moment they're violating a First or a Fourth Amendment right, because it's been so long since they've actually been out there on the street doing it. And so it's a very interesting kind of early result that we're seeing. Now, it's not that important in the law enforcement world necessarily right now, because the chief level, the sheriff level, the lieutenant and captain level, they're not out on the street usually, right? They're coaching, they're guiding, they're strategizing, they're putting assets in place. But it is important that they recognize this stuff, communicate with their more junior officers.
It's a fascinating subject. Transitioning into your work with the military, basically some of it along the same lines, except manning a weapon or sitting behind a 105 millimeter gun. It's lethal force. The person that is sizing up that situation at the time and giving the command to fire is someone that has to understand the same thing, although in the field of battle, we're not as focused on the First and the Fourth Amendment. It is important because, you're going to kill somebody or many people if you make the wrong decision.
Right. That is actually an interesting point when, you consider the many retired or, previously in the service go into law enforcement because the rules of engagement change. A direct quote from a veteran that I know, he said one of the reasons that he couldn't be in law enforcement was because I would just, quote, rip the guy's arms off. And I was like, yeah, you can't really do that. But in the kind of theater they've been in, they don't have those same kind of rules, right?
The same applies to senior law enforcement, and I think the same applies to military, because depending on their position and how long they've been out of the field and what have you, since Gordon Moore made his prognostication in 1965, which we know as Moore's Law, the technological tsunami has taken place, and it ain't always good.
No, it's not always good. I mean, you have, situations in law enforcement where there's been an ongoing discussion and policy making around the use of language models and ChatGPT type things and AI. You have companies that are offering the ability to take a body-worn camera footage and translate that directly into a report that you would submit afterwards. Now, sounds like a great convenience, but to quote a lawyer that I know from Illinois, he said, that scares the bejesus out of me. He's looking at it from a legal perspective. I'm looking at it from a neurological perspective, but we both agree that the big problem with that kind of technological innovation is that if the body camera is facing forward, but the officer is looking to the left, and sees something that's relevant there, but doesn't see what's in front that the body camera is facing, there's going to be a difference between the officer's report and the camera's report of what happened. There's going to be so many differences between what the officer perceives in the moment and what the technology transcribes as his report of what he sees in the moment. And so there are varying, jurisdictions have embraced or non-embraced or put caveats around this type of technology and other types of technologies like that. But you do have this in the military as well. I mean, over the last year, there's been a lot of mudslinging around AI because of, certain companies that have worked with the Pentagon and wanted to have it their own way in certain things. And there was, for instance, a big spat between the makers of Claude and the White House, particularly the War Secretary, Pete Hegseth. And so, you're not immune to these kinds of conflict between technology development and how it interacts with people, in the military world as well. And, one of the things we're particularly proud of right now is that, Senator Dave McCormick from Pennsylvania has invited deCervo to be right in the thick of that kind of discussion by asking deCervo to participate in the Pennsylvania Innovation and Defense Summit at the Army War College, July 14th to the 15th. And it's a big honor to be, part of such an event because, President Trump is expected to give an address there. This invitation really reflects a growing recognition of our technology's potential for defense and veteran applications right here in the region and nationally, but also reflects that, the decision-making side of things, the neuroscience side of things, how it interacts with that, technological tsunami and the Moore's Law development of technology, that kind of rate is all really coming together and hinging on important events like that. That kind of, recognition from Senator McCormick, the invitation to be part of the Innovation and Defense Summit at the Army War College really gives us even more confidence as we expand into military applications.
And as you go through each one of these, in your former work with the military, you've done essentially two things, correct me if I'm wrong. First, working with the ergonomic and intellectual interface between the man and the machine to make the decisions that they have to make from their point of view quicker, better, and more accurate. You've also been working on the safety issues associated with the operator and the potential for traumatic brain injury associated with the concussive effects of the weapon. I believe you told me this research has influenced the design of personal protective equipment. So let's talk about the projects that you're involved with at Walter Reed and how it can involve some of our listeners and veterans.
Well, the Walter Reed development, pretty exciting. We're in our 6th month now of working with Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, which is mostly a research-focused component of Walter Reed. So it's not like directly working with patients yet, but it's where they develop the tools for working with the patients that would be going through Walter Reed. We're working on an app called Returned, and Returned is specifically got built into it the RTD, Return to Duty focus. It's a mobile app that uses gamified synthetic environments to help with mild TBI, also known as MTBI assessment, and the return to duty decisions. MTBI, it's unfortunately very common in military service. The majority of TBIs are mild, yet they can really impact executive decision-making, spatial awareness, memory, visual motor skills, many other functions. So, current tools sometimes lead to over-triage, or they lead to uncertainty about readiness, especially in the forward or more resource-limited settings. Think about where there's, no internet access, extreme temperatures, things like that. And Returned really, as an app, changes that, right? It delivers a realistic, scenario-based set of challenges on a mobile device that are tailored to military context using either Army-relevant footage or Army-relevant imagery and tasks that are built on that imagery and footage to deliver tasks that are scaled by difficulty. What's great about this is it can work in low bandwidth areas. So think of, extreme forward resource limited settings that require minimal direct medical involvement and at the same time allow longitudinal monitoring of recovery And so the key technological components really to that are, going back to AI, is machine learning. Today, AI has kind of been the term slapped on things like ChatGPT and that are chatbots. But machine learning is really the more general term for the calculations that are going on behind the scenes on that. And they're calculating all the numbers in matrices that tell you what the next word is that comes out on the screen. And so powered by AI machine learning, the Returned is providing objective quantitative data on cognitive performance in a variety of resource-limited settings to provide this kind of objective quantitative data on the cognitive performance to make better RTD calls, better return to duty calls, improve triage, customized care, support warfighters closer to the point of need. And this really directly builds on what we did with the NHL officials, with the uHIT product. It's all about repeated, realistic practice that leads to measurable gains in their accuracy and speed of decision making. And so really for veterans and service members, this means better recovery support, fewer unnecessary evacuations when appropriate, and stronger readiness. And it's really neuroscience applied where it matters most, helping those who served regain and maintain the decision-making skills that are essential to duty and just daily life.
When we initially talked about the military, there were some opportunities you thought for veterans to work with and for you. How has that worked out? Are you employing some veterans?
We're almost there. When we first met in 24, we were actually just before getting news that a pretty large project was included by the Senate markup of what the Army would be working on the following year. And then over the course of the next 6 months and the election and just, a bunch of mudslinging in D.C., unfortunately, it didn't happen. So we weren't able to hire any veterans then. And we put in again following year, and unfortunately, nothing landed. This year, we do have some potential positive news. About a month ago, the House included one of our projects in their markup. And it's interesting, for anyone who doesn't really know how the money gets spent. First, the House says, we want to spend on these things. And then the Senate says, we want to spend on these things. And then if there are any overlaps or there are any differences, they got to figure it out. That's called conference. So between the House saying what they want to spend on, the Senate saying what they want to spend on, and then conference, that whole process can take like 3 to 6 months on average. So we haven't been able to hire any veterans yet because we haven't yet gotten like full go ahead on those much larger projects. The Walter Reed project is still a research heavy project. However, we are actively looking now to have either veterans or non-veterans who want to support veterans test the app that we're building and provide feedback. To make Returned as an app as effective as possible, we really need your help. And it's easy. You can visit deCervo.com/Walter Reed. That's DECERVO.com/Walter Reed. And Reed is spelled REED. And you sign up for a 45-minute virtual session with anyone on our team. And what will happen is you'll experience the technology, you'll share your insights, and you'll be compensated for your time. Right now, we're $30 for your time. So we do appreciate, value people's time with us. And in your participation, will directly shape a tool that helps service members return to duty safely and effectively. So I encourage everyone to please sign up. And this is a very tangible way to support the community. deCervo.com/Walter Reed.
Well, as usual, very informative.
Thank you for the time today. At deCervo, we're passionate about using brain science to empower better decisions and stronger recovery. So anyone wants more information about what we do, deCervo.com for more on uHIT, and uCALL, eTRAIN, or Returned. Glad to keep the conversation going with you, and looking forward to coming back, keeping you posted on Let's Talk Vets.